Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Radio the Drum, the podcast where we feature those that have experienced success despite having daily struggles with ADHD. I'm your host, Mikolai Bador, and I am so honestly honored. I always say thrilled, I always say excited because I don't invite duds on this one. But this is a really special episode and a really special guest, so we're going to go long, prepare. Nathan Terborg is a dear friend of mine, but he's also been a mentor and inspiration for me from my, struggling with addiction myself to being a coach for that, but also being a prolific entrepreneur who has had 9 lives in the realm of success, from running a successful insurance agency to running multiple different projects simultaneously to then manifesting and telling me a long time ago, I want to be an artist. Like I want to be an artist that's heard. And he's doing just that. He has work featured all over the world. He's a blue star, social influencer, and he does it right. I am so thrilled and blessed to introduce you all to Nathan Terborg. Nathan, brother, how you doing?
I'm fantastic. I am prepared to not be a dud. That's our baseline. Don't dud.
That's our threat. That's our threshold. Now, I have to ask before we get into kind of your origin story and so on. Is as a real artist, like you're the first true artist, real artist, famous artist that we've ever had on the show. Just because you can, do you ever just yell out of nowhere, "It's not purple, it's magenta"? Do you ever do that just because you can?
I do not.
It's a shame. That's a shame. You should.
If that's a reference to something I should know, I should maybe just tell you I don't know that.
No, that's just my tricky little brain. Just
got it. Okay.
Firing thoughts out.
I thought you were pulling a cultural reference from a film or something that I should have seen, but no.
Dude, if there's a guy, if that was a scene in a movie, I know you would already have it memorized. Or if it was a '90s, hip hop song, I know you already have the beat back to it. So no, I just was curious, man. I know that everyone listening is probably curious too.
I do a lot of screaming. I mean, for sure, I do a lot of yelling. Mostly at myself. Yeah.
Don't we all?
Yeah.
Right on, brother. Well, this is an honor to have you on, man. It's been a while to chase you down because you're traveling from Munich to wherever, featuring your art. So, with that, would you mind jumping into your origin story and let us know a little bit more about you before we get into some fiery questions that I have for you?
Sure. So let's see, how far back do we want to go? I grew up in a small town in central Minnesota, and growing up, I was always I was up for anything. I did like I never actually got a letter jacket. You probably did, didn't you? Were you a letter jacket guy?
I did, but it was in running. I had it actually. Like, they give you the letter and then they're like, clearly you're not, no one puts these on jackets anymore. Well, there was a few of us that did.
Yeah, so I never got the letter jacket. But if I had, I would have covered, both sleeves with everything that I did. None of them at a high level, you know what I mean? But just like I was down to participate, you know what I mean? So all the sports, in addition, so the whatever, baseball, basketball, football, track, but also speech, choir, 3-act play, art club. Like if it was interesting to me, I would try it. And so then when I went to college, I studied briefly everything from psychology to journalism. I minored in art, very briefly, but I went to college to play football up at Concordia, up in Fargo Moorhead, Division III. I was just had a big enough frame to fill a jersey. Wasn't incredibly talented, but at the end of my freshman year, after enough time on the meal plan and training hard in the weight room, I'm 6'5", I weighed 250. And fast forward to about 2.5 years later, I was checking into rehab for the second time. And I remember weighing in, during the intake, and the nurse said, "Okay, so it looks like you're 167. She goes, "Is that normal for you?" And I said, "No, that is less. That is I haven't weighed that little since I was probably 11 years old, to be quite honest." So meth was my end of the road drug, and that put a stop to everything academic, everything athletic, obviously. And so that was a big reset for me. And we can talk more, and I'm sure will, about my path with addiction and recovery. But that really was a big sort of, yeah, just reset for my life overall. During that time, I was introduced to or direct sales. Found out that I had a knack for sales and for selling. And so once I really got serious about the business of recovering and putting a life back together and building a life, I decided to pursue that. And my sales career turned into building a team within an organization, which then evolved into, building my own agency, which I sold at the end of 2020 to pursue my dream of being an artist. And so here we are. How's that? That was pretty short.
It was beautiful, man. I have some questions I would unpack in that one. I think a lot of people grow up to say, I want to be a football player, and I want to be an artist. I don't think many would say, I would like to grow up to be a meth addict. So let's go back to the roots of where that started. And if it was ADHD, ADD, if it was, your home, bring us there.
Yeah, so I've had a lot of time. Obviously, now I've been sober. Thank God for it'll be 23 years this coming April, so a couple months here. So 22 years and some change. So I've had a lot of time to really think about and unpack like how did I get to be this way. And I'll kind of cut to the chase. I think one thing I've learned about recovery and just being on a growth progression over time is that for me, the how did I get to be this way is much less important than that this is my situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's easy I share that because I think it's easy to sort of get stuck in the trap of what I, for me, have identified as a trap of, really trying to get down to the root source of like, how did this begin? Which certainly does have value, in a lot of, growth work. Absolutely. But for me, when it comes to the addiction side of things, I learned that there really wasn't a ton of value, or better put, there wasn't a lot of actionable, information from the why, the what being, I am an addict. And now what do I do about it was far more important and still is, to this day. So the role that ADD played for me, I didn't really identify that, specifically from a diagnosis basis until about 2 years ago, when I realized how I'd suspected it for quite some time, right? I mean, there are plenty of data points that I could point to and say, yeah, this is, not normal, right? My inability to focus on things that don't interest me is extreme. I would say that, from an observational behavioral standpoint, I'm probably not somebody who you'd look at and say, oh, that's one of mine, right? I mean, I think when I first shared it with you that we had that in common, I remember you being a little bit surprised, by that. But the link between the two, I mean, certainly there's a correlation. I don't know the data, but I have looked this up a little bit. There is for sure a correlation, between ADD, and addiction, absolutely. And you probably know more about that, the specifics of that, than I do. Certainly people that are drawn towards stimulants, are even more likely to, fall in that category. Because for me, what I found, so I did there wasn't a drug I met that I didn't like, literally. So the progression I could share, everything, but meth was like the end of the road, but I did, a ton of everything else, a lot of psychedelics, a lot of LSD, plenty of coke, plenty of pills, plenty of like all of the above, that's not that important. But I think what I found when I really got into, amphetamines and any, sort of stimulant like that was a feeling of like, oh, this is how my brain is supposed to work. Early on, right? Like, as with most crutches, as with most, things that fall in that category, whether it be alcohol, drugs, fill in the blank, like it works really well for a short amount of time, and then it stops working and gets, really, really dark, really quick. I'm not suggesting that meth was ever like a, functional way for me to live a productive life, but there was certainly a sense of like, oh, wow, this is like my brain, I can actually, think clearly again, just right at first. Does that make sense?
Totally, man.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was diagnosed when I was 25, my friend had her mom was a was a prolific Kansas City expert in child ADD, and she said, do you think, do you know, kind of stuff. And I went to meet with a doctor called Dr. Chitters. And back in the day, we used to go to the Sundance Film Festival every year. And I remember one time, and I mean one time, like I'm not here to, and my mom's probably listening. I did cocaine when we were there, and everyone else is, kind of buzzing out. And I was like, it was the first time that my brain actually like felt
Hmm.
there. I was
Yeah.
like, I could hear conversations and whatnot. And when I went to this doctor, we went through a list of questions and tests, and he'd actually said, "Have you ever tried a stimulant?" And I said, "I tried cocaine once." And he goes, "How did that go?" And I went, ironically, I said, "I see why people like it. I was actually focused and present for the first time. I didn't have this AM radio, in my head that sticks." And
Hmm.
he's like, "Yeah, well, here's why."
Yeah.
And I had never experienced that, so that's interesting. Um, I want to go back because I really do want to unpack, not just, this isn't a show only about addiction, although that has been one of the things is interest. You mentioned interest when you found your interest and how things changed for you. But for a lot of the people that are listening to this show, they are parents of kids that are in high school or younger that may or may not have this. There are kids that listen to this. And by the way, to be respectful for our kids out there, I'm 44, so I've become that middle-aged dude who calls anyone but younger than me a kid. So take that with all due respect. I still wish I was a kid. So, but you had a lot of interests, it sounds like, in high school. You were involved in a lot of different things. You didn't have a cool Letterman's jacket like I did. Just kidding. But you were attracted to a lot of different things. Tell us, what was it like growing up in your household? What drove you to be involved in all those types of things?
Yeah, I think, one characteristic that has presented itself in my life from the very beginning that continues to this day is that of just being insatiably curious. I'm just perpetually fascinated by anything that catches my attention, you know? And so I've always just wondered like, what if I tried that? What would that be like? What would that experience be like? And
Yeah.
I think that actually did contribute, for me early on to just, being open-minded to like, yeah, I'll try that. I'll see, so the same thing that caused me to try things that I wasn't naturally good at, you know what I mean? Like, a 6'5", 200 and whatever I was at the time, 30-pound, defensive lineman probably isn't going to do great, especially in the running events and track, but hey, why not? So congratulations. You're the slowest person on the, best 4x8 relay, which is way worse, by the way, than being the fastest person on the number 2 4x8 relay, which I would have preferred looking back because I was for sure not the anchor in the traditional sense of the word in terms of running last, but the anchor in terms of the thing that was weighing us down and slowing our overall time. But so
Thanks for the
anyway, so
clarification. That's funny.
yeah, yeah. So there was just just always an interest, in trying things, and I think I was very fortunate to have parents that were just super supportive of allowing us to just pursue our interests. And so yeah, so I was always just encouraged, like, hey, if that seems interesting, give it a try. I'm asked a lot now what my formal training is in art, and I don't really have one. I'm self-taught. Apart from when I was a child, we actually had not one, but actually two family friends that were both in the arts and academic teachers, and one of whom was a working professional as well who showed his work. But my parents at different times in childhood got me connected with Doug and Julie to give me sort of just like one-on-one, art lessons. And so from a very young age, I was encouraged, like, you know, pursue that, dip into that part of your interest and part of that personality. And so I've always just had sort of this like approach, again, thanks to my parents and upbringing, just like, yeah, go ahead and try. Nothing's off limits. It's all sort of on the menu for you.
That's amazing. The support that you received, growing up to pursue something like that, because there's some people listening, and we've had engagement with some where we're dealing with, I don't want to say dealing, but raising somebody that might have ADHD or have ADD. You want to. It's tough to enable them to pursue these interests because there's so many, and you just don't know.
100%. Let me speak more to your question, Mick, because I think something just occurred to me as you're saying that. one of the best things I think that we can do as parents, because we have two daughters. Our oldest is now in college; she's in her first year at university,
Unreal.
and our youngest is a sophomore in high school. And I think that, without naming names, we've had different challenges that may or may not fall in different categories. But I will say that one of the things that I found really helpful for myself and tried to instill in our children has been having multiple outlets for identity. I think that there can be the tendency, especially if a child is struggling with school, to say, all right, well, you're just going to be school. You can't do the other stuff until you get your school squared away. And I'm by no means an expert, but I can say for myself and for our kids, it's been really helpful to have, another identity, another way to sort of feel success and feel value and get fulfillment outside of school. Because in the absence of that, if the only report card on how we're doing is the actual report card, that can be a recipe for, I think, a real unnecessary dip or shot, to one's self-esteem, especially if school's not going well.
When you talk about identity, I mean, that's the struggle between myself and a lot of our guests is, when you're struggling in school, which I did, you kind of, you self-identity identify as kind of a dum-dum, and when you're trying to figure out who you are and you're feeling like a dum-dum, it's tough to focus on interests because school's going so poorly that you wonder, will I be successful in any of these other endeavors? Did you feel like when you were, let's go back to, let's say sophomore, did you feel like you fit in, or did you feel at that moment like you stood out as an outlier, or how did that go for you?
Yeah, I think for me, I remember vividly, going back even to like early elementary school, some of my earliest memories are feelings of, rejection or not fitting in, and it's interesting because I can only guess at this, but I wouldn't imagine that, someone observing me, from a distance or even up close would have guessed that, right? Like I didn't have problems necessarily, socially, but the way that I interpreted the world, the way that I felt, was that my identity was, always and still is based on how am I performing, right? This is some of the work that I've done since then, and some of the things that I think, some of the beautiful gifts, of middle age and just maturing as an adult is being able to look back and kind of piece things together and realize like, all right, what type of wiring am I dealing with here, and how do I best leverage that to live a life of, fulfillment? And for me, a big part of that was just realizing like, okay, I am very wired for achievement and for success. And so understanding that for a long time, especially in like when I first realized this, I'm going back maybe 10, 15 years, so late 20s, early 30s, realizing that, gosh, I have this, I initially identified that as an ugly part of me, like, oh, that's kind of gross. It's kind of gross that I'm so, wired for, achievement, right? That I'm so dependent on external, validation. And
Yeah.
since then, I've definitely, I'm closer than I've ever been to making peace with the positive benefits of that, right? Like that has been a very effective fuel, a very effective sort of driving force, that has led to some positive things happening in some of the successes that I've experienced. But it's also making peace and finding a way to separate that as a motivating factor from a need to be okay.
Yeah. Well, that drive for success seems to be kind of a common thread, in between the various guests that we've had. I got a quick question. You played college ball. Did you play with Bryce Cason? He was our guest on episode 1.
I did.
You played with him?
How deep did you go with Bryce?
We went deep, man. Well, his was more his military and his jiu-jitsu stuff,
Okay.
which he's world ranked now, and you are world ranked if we want to consider art a sport.
I'm really not.
Which,
you're overemphasizing that, but I appreciate you saying that.
Well, Munich is in the world, and
it is. That is factually correct. So I did. So I'm a year ahead of Bryce in school. So you guys graduated together?
We did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm a year ahead of you guys. I graduated in '98, so yeah, so Bryce was a freshman when I was a sophomore, and so we had a lot of fun in college. I'm asking how deep you went because I don't know how much he talks about his college days, but we had some times.
He was careful. How about that?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we did
I
go through
don't
some.
out anybody, but yeah.
Well, back to driven by success and 6'5". I find it funny for those that don't know. I'm about 5'10", and Nathan is 6'5", and even in this podcast, as you can see, he's just a hair taller than I am, even in this recording. So
I mean, we
thanks
can
for
adjust
reminding
that.
me.
It's not hard to do. Look at that. Look at that. Look at you. What's up,
I'm
tall
a
guy?
big boy. I'm a big boy. So you played college ball and then meth. So, and I'm that's kind of a hard pivot to bring that up, but it is a common thread, and I want folks to hear this, that it happens to all of us. And sometimes success becomes our drug, and we become addicted to it and that validation, and constantly feeling like we need to overachieve to overcome this dopamine deficiency that we have. What Walk us through the story of I'm playing football, I'm at scholarship maybe, and then I hit a bump called meth in a road. How?
No scholarships for Division III, to be clear. I mean, you're doing it because you really enjoy it. But so
Yeah, well,
definitely not.
one
Even
of
if
us
I
played
had
football in
gone to
college, so kudos to you.
yeah. Well, listen. I mean, even if I had gone to a Division II school that allowed some scholarships, I would have been a walk on at at that university. But yeah, I mean, so for me, I mean, it would have been, it's. How did it get from here? So I left out a part of my story, like from a partying standpoint. Like I was a pretty good kid, in high school, like played by the rules for the most part, and was always very aware of protecting my eligibility and not, getting busted, for whatever and losing the ability to continue to participate in sports, and other activities. And so, I mean, I drank, I don't know, maybe 10 times, maybe a dozen times, and when I graduated from high school, I didn't smoke pot for the first time, I don't think, until like maybe the summer before my freshman year, you know what I mean? So, but when I got to college, and it's not like that's a big part of like the college culture, specifically at that school, but in Fargo-Moorhead, there's a couple of other universities there. And yeah, I mean, I guess it's just the classic tale of, a little became more, and more has always been my favorite amount for anything. Right.
Oh,
So like if a little's good, more will probably be great. And it's that extremism that I've certainly, made peace with, and now have come to really, leverage as a benefit, that extremism, that willingness to continue to push things farther when properly focused is an absolute, superpower, like for sure. I'm getting off topic, shockingly, for a podcast of this nature. So bring back to your original question, if you feel like it's pertinent, but I do feel like, the things that can be perceived in certain arenas as big weaknesses can absolutely be our greatest strengths. 100%, and that's something I really love talking about. I could talk about that for another, hour if you wanted to, but I'll leave it there and let you ask a follow-up.
no, let's go with that. I mean, that's because, I mean, as you know, I think it's been clear now as these episodes progress, is I'm as much of a listener as I am a host, because I have all the things that guests have brought up, even when they think you couldn't relate to this. Yes, I can. From driven by success
Yeah.
to idle hands. If I'm not interested, or I'm not active, if I'm not activating this, idle hands have brought me to, too much alcohol, or too much award. I was an award chaser forever. We did copy and closes. There wasn't enough awards or validation,
Yeah.
and the bigger we got, the more I needed it, because it's like I couldn't achieve more. And I think that's rooted deeply in, where I grew up, and what I was told, not by
Yeah.
my parents, but by others, that, so I always had that chip on my shoulder. Did you have a chip on your shoulder as well? I mean, you're 6'5", you're
For
talented.
sure.
Like, there's a lot of advantages that you have where a short guy like me had to overcome, various things. But
Yeah, I mean, so for sure, for no good reason, right? Like it's not, it's not like, I mean, again, like the saying of like the worst thing you've been through is the worst thing you've been through, so there's a lot of I think I struggle for a long time, in adulthood with like this whole idea of like, well, I had great parents, I had a good childhood, like I don't have anything to complain about, which is true, but that sort of mentality certainly can stunt one's growth if it causes one to, which it did in my case, sort of dismiss the things that were very real to me, right? So like I absolutely sort of processed the rejection that I felt at different times into I'll show you, chip on my shoulder. You mentioned the word chasing earlier, and I think that's a really important, sort of way of looking at things. Like I have been chasing something or some things, my entire life, as have most of us, right? So, I think and now I remember the original question. I'll land the plane on how I got from football to meth. Um, but it's chasing. It's we get a sense of something that is going to fill a hole that we don't know, right? We continue to try and stuff things in this sort of, God-sized hole, as I would put it, right? Things that can only be completely filled with things of the spirit. But in doing so, we continue to try things that are going to give us a feeling that we're looking for, right? So when I started using drugs, I was like, oh, this is what it feels like to fit in. This is what it feels like to be authentic, right? I mean, there are certain drugs and experiences that I had, on different drugs that absolutely made me feel like, oh, this is how I want to feel all the time. And so I continued to chase that and chase that and chase that. And so ultimately, I mean, really my priorities just switched, right? So with football, I was probably chasing some sense of, self-worth by being on the team and attempting to have, success on the field. And that was just replaced by chasing a feeling of, I suppose, belonging. I think that I did feel a sense of, really fitting in and belonging to a group with the people that I started, partying with in a way that I didn't experience, with other guys on the football team. You know what I mean? So it's always going to be sort of that chasing. And I think that to me, the trajectory that I aspire to be on now and for the rest of my life is just, really recalibrating and being intentional about what it is, that I'm chasing, and being aware of how I'm leveraging my motivations, for doing that. Right. So I realized recently that, the way that I approach my art and my sort of art career as an artist and my goals in that regard, it's really no different than what I was doing in business or with sports or with, anything else, right? I'm just sort of switching it a little bit. And so a lot of it for me has been, just making peace with like, okay, there's going to be an element of sort of approval and external validation. Like when I share work, when I have a show, like the goal, of course, like I want it to be seen, by as many people as possible. I want for it to be understood and appreciated. But that desire has to be secondary to me feeling like I am fulfilling, my purpose, and my calling. And when everything else, right, apart from how I feel internally about the work, and my relationship, with my creator, the rest is all secondary, when I'm on the beam, so to speak.
Right on. Well, I mean, I think, with my relationship when I was, alcohol was to be a part of something, right?
Mm-hmm.
To be a part of something. And sometimes alcohol, if you abuse it, meth, not familiar, but whatever that thing is, sometimes we talk about party culture, and party culture, especially drinking in northern Minnesota, was that's you're part of a couple different cliques, right? And
Mm-hmm.
if you want to have fun, that's what you do. But there is a sense of belonging. And the older we get, I think, and I know you spend a lot of time by yourself in the studio, making art. I spend a lot of time by myself in this studio trying to make a great podcast, or music. You can't see my little setup over there, but you know, when it comes to that, when did it click where, and I do want to get into your entrepreneurial story. So I'm not trying to, bump this, but I'm trying to tailor this towards listeners. And sometimes
I'm
there's
here for
listeners
you,
that
pal. You can talk about whatever you want.
are right on. They feel like maybe they're an outlier. You know what I
have
mean?
no
And there's a
agenda.
sense of, there's a sense of belonging that they want
Yeah.
to attract to. And sometimes that
Yeah.
can lead you to the wrong crowd. Um, you know, it sounds like the wrong crowd attracted you. It wasn't like you sought out meth or sought out, alcohol to that extreme. But was there some validation that you found? Actually, here's what I'm trying to get to is finding wrong validation in the wrong crowds and how to avoid it. Maybe that's what I'm trying to lean towards.
Rephrase your question for me.
Hanging out with the football jocks, working out every day, feeling a part of that team and feeling validation within that team, and then finding yourself with the wrong team, drugs, alcohol, those types of folks. What would you say to someone that is maybe tiptoeing around? And I have someone in mind. That's why I'm asking this question for that person. Were you tiptoeing around the wrong person? You just don't know when. Oh, it's too late. It's too late. Like I was tiptoeing, I was experimenting, and now I got to get out, and I don't know how.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to really acknowledge the tremendous influence that the things we expose ourselves to has on us, in terms of our surroundings. And, we've all heard, you're going to be the average of the, five people that you spend the most time, interacting with. I wouldn't call that the wrong crowd, because there were some great people that I genuinely had love for, and if I saw them today, would be excited to see how they're doing. But certainly the wrong activity, which I think is what you mean. I'm just clarifying. I think that it's not quite that, sort of binary in terms of like, this crowd is good because they're doing good things, and this crowd is bad, because they're doing bad things. But I think it's the overall essence of that message is, for sure true in terms of like be mindful of who you're spending time with and who you're exposing yourself to, and just be aware that it is extremely difficult, nearly impossible to not fall into the habits and lifestyle of the people that you spend, most of your time with, right? So as parents, that's why we're so mindful of hoping, that our kids spend time with kids that, other kids that have, similar, priorities and character, because we know how much that's going to, influence, kind of how they turn out. Did that answer your question at all?
Yeah, in a way.
Not really.
No, it's
Great.
good.
Okay. I'll try it next time.
No, and I don't want to dwell on this, and I feel like half the show's been about this, but again, in this show, I'm very sensitive because I know what it's like to feel like you're different in a bad way. I know what it was like, to try and figure that out.
Yeah. Let me talk about that.
The route.
Thank you. Sorry to cut you off, but I want to, you reminded me of something I wanted to share earlier. I think one of the most valuable perspectives that that I have learned about myself and that I try to share with others is really the understanding of like, it's not just you. It's really easy to fall into the trap of like this sort of idea of, in the 12 steps in recovery, it's called terminal uniqueness, meaning surely I'm the only one who has these struggles, these challenges, these experiences. And that just isn't true. It just isn't, right? Like the beautiful thing about getting connected with other people who share the same struggles and are working towards a solution in their lives is you realize, oh, I'm not the only one, that has these challenges. That's why somebody who identifies in the sort of ADD, ADHD space is so well served to be listening to a podcast like yours, to be interacting with other people, who have not just the same struggles, but are actively working towards a solution, because that provides hope, right? So if I'm in the mindset of like, oh, I'm the only one that has these types of challenges or struggles, that's a lonely place to be, first of all, but it also provides very little hope for the future, right? Like, well, it's just me, and boy, I'm either going to hopefully stumble blindly into, an answer or something that works, or, I'm screwed, right? That's not where we want to spend our time. It's, hey, I share this particular, affliction, or better put, these particular challenges or obstacles that are unique to all of us, right? Like we all have our own unique sort of combination of stuff, right? That makes us, unique specifically. But I think that acknowledging that, nobody has it really figured out. If there's one thing I learned about people is that the only difference between people that appear like they have it figured out and those that don't are, what their life circumstances look like and how good they are, at hiding it. Everyone is just doing their best to figure it out as they go and make it look like they know what they're doing. And some are better, than others. So I think just operating from that place of like, hey, we're all perfectly flawed, human beings, all of whom, have our challenges. Again, some of them more immediately obvious, than others, but there's a lot of hope in that what has solutions that have worked for others will by extension then also work for us.
And that moment of when and how to ask for help, it took me too long. It took me
Yeah.
way too long to
Yeah.
realize it's okay to be vulnerable. In fact, this whole show, the whole point is to bring on people that have a massive success like yourself, but having them be vulnerable, because we can talk about all the stuff you've done well, and we will, but the stuff that brought us there and kind of inspired that. But what would you advise someone that's like, do I need help, and how do I ask for it?
I mean,
Right?
probably.
Well, I know I do every day.
No,
Maybe.
I would say that broadly, to all of us. I mean, I think that, if we're going to oversimplify the equation here and just say that the options are to either figure it out on our own, and again, just kind of cross our fingers and hope that, whatever, the beam of light shines down and gives us the answer, or reaching out and looking for other resources, from other people, I'm going to choose option B every single time, and I think that starts from a place of like real humility. It's kind of paradoxical to think about it like this, but in saying, oh, I got this, or I'll figure it out on my own, in spite of all evidence to the contrary, that one has the ability to figure it out on their own, which certainly was the case, for me in more than one, circumstances. There's a tremendous amount of ego and hubris around the idea of like, I'll just figure it out and pull myself up by my bootstraps. Sure, maybe. I mean, good luck.
Yeah, right.
And here's the thing. Let's just pretend for a moment that we could. Let's just pretend for a moment like that actually was a viable option. Even if that was the case, I'm still going to choose the path of let me learn from other people. Let me assimilate, their wisdom, right? Wisdom being life, like, information applied to life, right? And let me accelerate my progression, right? I mean, one of the things that I think has transferred for me, broadly across anything that I've already, put my energy into and tried to pursue, has been that I'm always willing to start with like, who's doing this at the highest level, or just a higher level, than me. Let me start there. Like, what are you all doing? And I'll say this too. I mean, shoot, there's never been a better time ever in the history of history to be self-taught at anything, or to acquire that wisdom and that knowledge, right? Like, if you or I had, well, heck, I mean, when we were first dealing with some of these things early in life, there wasn't even an internet, to go to. And for all its tremendous, downsides and challenges and things that places like social media can have, there are some really positive, benefits of that, as well. There's a wealth of information, on, whatever, good old YouTube University, more situational things, places like Reddit. Got to be careful there, because you can go down some, I mean, again, you got to choose your sources carefully. But the point is that, there may not be someone, next in your household or even in your town that's experiencing what you're experiencing, but there absolutely are hundreds, thousands, probably millions of other human beings on the planet that are where you're at or have been where you're at, right? So it's are we reading? Are we listening to podcasts? Are we reaching out? But it does begin from that place of vulnerability, of first of all, acknowledging like, I don't have the answers. And then by extension, what if I were just to ask, the vulnerability? I mean, that's such a power. I do a podcast with a good artist friend of mine. And we talk about this a lot, so as creatives, as artists, the power of vulnerability, how the more niche and unique the things that we're making are to us, the more it's going to resonate with the people for whom it's supposed to connect with, right? When you and I were talking about, you doing this podcast, right? And my advice to you was like, if you have found something, a subject that you would do 1,000 episodes of with only however many people, listening to it without making any money from it, whatever, without that being a concern, but just, speaking your authentic voice on the topic and topics that are most important and authentic to you, it's going to be a success, whatever, success looks like. You know what I mean? So I think it's just really important to start from that place of like, I don't have the answers, but the answers are out there, and again, I'm not encountering or facing something that is that hasn't been addressed many, many times before, and in many cases, successfully. So what's the roadmap here? How can I increase the number of inputs and data points, from places other than just me trying to figure it out on my own to accelerate that growth and that progression overall?
Well, and you talk about, Doug and Julie, right? Like there's podcasts, there's also a scroll tree growing in my backyard. And for some of the listeners are like, all right, there's a lot of podcasts, a lot of books. Like, how do I filter out what is and what isn't? And then, you brought up Doug and Julie, and that's, my Uncle John is going to be on here, and he's been my muse in a lot of different music and martial arts and things that have really been a positive drum beat for me, to coin the radio on the drum. How Before we get into your entrepreneurial journey, because I want to get into there, is how do we filter out what is and what isn't, and how do we hone? Because there's people listening right now that are our age that are like, I've been working a corporate job for a long time. Very few have jumped right into entrepreneurship like you did, which is really neat. Like that was your path from the get. What advice would you find for people to find the sources of truth for them that attract to those niches, those interests, to possibly pursue a career in something that they really want to do, like art?
So I think it starts with just asking the people who, you respect, who are, doing cool shit, or have aspects of their life that are attractive to you, and asking them what are your inputs, right? Because there's certainly things, about the way that you carry yourself and the way that you live your life, Nikolai, that I appreciate and respect and influence me in a positive way. And you've shared and will continue to, some of those things, with me. But I can also ask, what are your inputs? Where are you? What are you learning from? Where are you absorbing? Some of these things, because chances are pretty damn good that you didn't just invent all of these things on your own, right? You acquired them from other sources. So, hey, what are your inputs? Where are you getting your information? What really resonates and connects with you that's helped you along the way? It's one of the best questions, you can ask, right? So, just for example, just with you and I, right? Like you connected, Nikki and I with Donovan, right? Because, I really, really respect the way that you manage, you guys' financial side of things and your investments. And I said, hey, what do you, and you connected, and that was an amazing. And so now, we have, for our family and for our financial future, a connection to somebody that we would not have been connected to otherwise, had I not asked somebody who, has success in that area and knows more than I do in that space, hey, who are you using, or what are you doing, right? So just asking that question of like, what are you listening to? What are you reading? Who are you talking to? What are your inputs? And then just copying, right? Like you can really, and so from an artistic standpoint, like, we talk a lot about, great artists, steal, right? Meaning, but you have to steal around. In other words, you have to diversify your influences. There's plenty of art of all types, right? Music, film, visual arts, literature, that is a copy or very, just another iteration of something that's been done before and probably way better, right? There are a lot of, this is just coming to mind right now, but there's a lot in the art space. A lot of people are just direct ripoffs of an artist like Basquiat, right? And it's so obvious because,
Really?
oh
Sorry.
yeah, because he developed such a unique and distinctive style that's incredible. But anyone who's copying that, it's just going to be a second or third or fourth or fifth rate, version of something that's been done before. However, if he is one of dozens of other influences, right? Well, now we've got a recipe where we're taking ingredients from a lot of different places. We're taking influences and inspiration, throwing into this beautiful, sort of crock pot, this and mixing up this incredibly unique, potpourri that is unique, to just us, right? So to simplify, what I'm saying here is target your influences and diversify your influences, right? I think that from just a practical standpoint, in life, I mean, I know some incredible human beings. I've got some great friends and mentors in different spaces that I'm incredibly grateful for, having in my life. I honestly can't really think of anybody who's got it dialed in every category that's important to me, right? And
Yeah.
so when I talk about diversifying my influences, I have a variety of people who I look to for advice, for input, for resources in the areas that are important to me, and it's different, right? For the different areas, the person who knows the most, or might be a resource on the spiritual side, is going to be different maybe than the person who is going to be a resource, from a financial standpoint, which is going to be different than the person who's got their relationships and their marriage dialed in, which might be different from the people who know the most about, fitness and health and other things, right? So diversifying influences, I think, is incredibly important, right? Like, I think that, a big contributor to, whatever success I've had has been a product of proactively seeking out, different mentors and different, not to, sometimes in the traditional sense of that word, sometimes just in the, hey, can I call you once in a while? You know what I mean? Are you willing to be a resource? If I call you once or twice a year with a specific question, are you willing to, take my call and help me out? And most people, who are interested in sort of paying it forward, which most highly successful people are, because they know that they're only standing on the shoulders of the giants that came before them, right? It's definitely a pay it forward, type of gig. And before you know it, you've got a collection, of really powerful and significant, resources for the areas that you've identified in your life that are important to you.
Absolutely. And I love that you said that, like, for as far as a process, my process has always been, I want to find eagles soar with eagles. And even when I was doing sales, thanks to you, actually, I got into sales, you and Ryan Padgett, when we were doing Southwestern, was finding people that you want to emulate and then doing your research. That's always been my process, is find the people that you want to grow up to be like someday. And I'm still trying to grow up to be like someone someday. And then doing your research, which is where Donovan came in, with finances, is I want to find someone who's living it.
Yeah.
I want to pick their brain. I want to get to know them. I want to know what their struggles are too, because like you said, once you get that person live, you find out if they're real. They'll just tell you that I didn't do these things well, and these things I'm struggling with. And that's how you build a bond and a friendship. And then going online and finding those paths, because if you go online first, and then I think if you reverse the process, sometimes there's a lot of information, it could freeze you. You're like, I've heard contradicting things from everyone, so I don't think I'm going to do whatever that thing I wanted to do.
There's a wide gap between the self-declared experts and people who are actually walking the walk, which is why I think it's so valuable to like start with like, who do I have? And maybe you don't have access, and that's understandable. Then you have to go outside your natural network. But even for people, that you might look to or sign up for a course or whatever it might be, online, like, look, are they walking the walk? Right?
Yeah.
Like fitness is an obvious one, but it's like, you're not going to hire somebody to coach you on training or nutrition who does not themselves look like, a version of something you might want to emulate. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
are you doing this? Or are you just talking about it? You know, not, which is not to say that that person couldn't have the information available, even if they weren't applying it. But I'm way more interested in, are they actually doing the shit? Are they living it? Are they doing it? You know, when my podcast co-host, Ty Nathan Clark, I initially met him through his mentorship program. And so when I decided to pursue this crazy, you know, art path, I knew for sure if I'd learned anything, you know, in business is like, all right, I need some coaching. I need some advice. I need some input. I was not interested in spending, you know, years and you know, tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars on a you know, traditional degree, because I just wanted to get into it and do it, which is for sure proven to be the right choice for me. But in the absence of a traditional, you know, academic degree, I knew I needed to, you know, find people like that. And so when I don't recall exactly how I first heard about his mentorship program, but the first thing I did was I'm going to go to his Instagram page. I'm looking at, do I like his work, right? Is he making a lot of it? And is he doing the thing? Is he walking the walk, or is he just, you know, pitching a program, that is, you know, well marketed and well packaged? And when I saw that he was doing the things that I aspired to do, then sign me up and let's move forward. You know what I mean? So just paying attention to like, all right, is this an authentic, you know, way of living for this person, or is it just something that they're putting out there for the sake of, you know, selling an ebook or whatever it might be?
What's cool about your story, man, is that, I mean, for a long time, like, you know, music, right? Talk about emulating. The Beatles themselves will tell, or well, let's look at the Stones. You know, Muscle Shoals. They'll flat out tell you that we stole. Like UK wasn't doing Southern rock.
Right.
They weren't doing soul in the UK at the time. They'll
Right.
straight up say we heard that sound and we wanted to emulate that sound, so we flew to Muscle Shoals and we hung out with those cats and we really got to live and breathe
Yes.
that art. And then they got to bring it back, and then, you know,
But not
the
just,
rest of
you know,
this.
more about the Stones than I do, but you know, but not just that, right? Too, I mean, also, you know, pulling aspects from jazz and from the blues and from other, right? That's what I was talking about before, about really diversifying your influences. So what you get is a sound that is only the Rolling Stones, because it wasn't just their version of something else. It was their version
Yeah.
of a number of other things that, when they put it together, you know, with those individuals, became, you know, this beautiful thing in and of itself.
And so to that point, and because you were at your studio right now, correct?
Yeah.
That is your art behind you.
Yeah.
For the listener here, and your Instagram it's Nathan Terborg, right? Like, it's very easy to find, and I can do that in post too.
Yeah,
to
just my
provide
full name.
links.
Yep.
Yep. Do you remember? Okay, so when we first moved to Whitefish, and I think you were just
I was.
deciding, yeah,
Yeah.
like, was that, you know, it wasn't your first, but I know it was. Anyway, just for the listener, he took our garage. So imagine we just got this garage. We just moved in, and he brings paint and stuff, takes over our garage. And I'm like, please don't spill. And he goes, I'm going to make a painting on this big ass piece of canvas or something. And I was like, okay. And he left with a rolled up beauty. And I think you sold it or you've hung it, but that was completely different art than the art that you're doing today, the
Yeah.
art that's right behind you. How did you find, because I am a music guy. I'm not an artist like you. I could never do what you do, but you found a lane that is like, I see your work, and I hope listeners also looking him up as we're talking, because it's very unique. Walk us through the transition of Muscle Shoals to, to your Rolling Stones when you decide you find your own sound.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it's actually a good, great question. It's a good way to kind of pull this idea full circle. So, you know, I started off like most artists of any kind, musicians or, you know, creatives of any kind do, which is like, let me just kind of do my version or my impression, you know, of the things that I like the most, you know. So my early work, you know, when I was still doing more traditional, you know, paint on canvas, was certainly, you know, derivatives of some of my favorites, you know, some of my heroes. And so you have to start somewhere, right? And so that's kind of where I began. I think that, you know, for me, one thing I've realized that's really helped to accelerate my progression is really just leaning into that insatiable curiosity that I talked about before. You know, I really try hard to shorten the gap between what if and why not. So a lot of us, and this applies to everybody, not just people that are in a creative endeavor, but like a lot of us have these ideas of, what if I tried that? What if I, and I think for most people, the what if is where it dies. The what if is just,
Yes.
yep, I had and we have magnificent ideas that come and go and they just, disappear like a mist into the ether. So for me, I think a lot about how can I shorten the gap between what if and why not? Now,
Hmm.
in what I'm doing, in the studio here, it's all about experimentation. It's all about exploration. It's all about what can I do with this? How can I get closer and closer to an authentic voice and making work that, to your point, and I appreciate what you said in the intro, that when you see it, is immediately recognizable as, something that I've done. And that's the goal. And so one thing that I do is I try to proactively delete things that look like other stuff. I'm at a point now where I have I have enough of my own style to recognize like, that's a little derivative of, something else. I'm a little too influenced by,
Oh,
the piece that I saw, recently. So here's an example, right? So like we're, my mom and I are taking a little mom son trip to Chicago this upcoming weekend for a family reunion. And so we're going to do a little art date. So we're going to spend a day and a half in Chicago, and I'm going to take her to a couple of my favorite museums and galleries. And so because I'm so influenced by the things that I love and the things that I see, it's entirely possible that I might go and, sit in front of a Cy Twombly piece that they have at their permanent collection there. And I will sit in front of that for half an hour and just, bathe in its absolute glory. It's entirely possible that I'm going to come back to the studio, next week, and some of that's going to seep in a little bit thicker, a little bit too recognizable, than I might want for it to. And so for me, I'm actively trying to sort of, audit myself on, is this authentic to me, or is this sort of just my version of something that I was directly influenced by? Do you know what I mean?
yeah.
So a lot of it comes from just, so yeah, I guess I'll just share the kind of the progression, right? So like what I'm doing now, I work with almost exclusively found material, so I work with trash. Everything that I do is a product of like, I got the shallow depth of field of my camera here, but like this piece is made from floor scraps from a floor that was torn up, some billboard tarp, some packing plastic, and what else is in that one? That might be it. This is made from an old packing crate that I pull out of a dumpster. I've really just sort of fallen into making work from things that have been discarded and sort of dismissed. I didn't realize until a good couple years into doing that how much of that is reflective of my story and kind of my whole like, purpose, I suppose, with people, right? You think about, I was once dismissed and I was once, discarded by virtue of my own choices, right? But the people that I'm most interested in being of service to and helping are people who, haven't had it easy, who have been through some things. I believe that our scars can really become our superpowers. In other words, the things that have been most difficult, most challenging, to go through, the types of experiences that we would never choose, to go through, right? Are the things that can ultimately lead to our greatest strengths and our greatest ability to be of service to others. So one of the things that was transformational for me in even getting into this art deal to begin with was losing my dad. So when my dad passed away, we were preparing for his funeral, and collecting all the photos, as one does, for the services. And as we're, picking the best photos and kind of sorting through things, we came across a number of pictures of my dad doing things in theater. He just loved to do little theater productions and act, like little sketches at church, did a
Really?
couple of, community productions and that kind of thing. And so his dream was to, when he retired, move a little bit closer to the cities and really dive in and do more, with theater. That's what he loved doing. and, had a heart attack and a stroke and passed away at 62. So he never got to that, sort of pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. He waited, and he never got a chance to do what he really had a passion for and what he really loved doing. And so that's what really got the gears turning for me of, all right, am I doing what I was put here to do? Am I fulfilling my highest calling now? And the conclusion that I came to was no, I'm not. I mean, my life in business made a lot of options and flexibilities possible for our family and for our future. But I realized, and that was absolutely what I was supposed to do up to that point. And so once those wheels got turning of, hey, what if I could do something that was more creative? And again, no idea of what it was even going to look like. I mean, I didn't do anything artistic for, over 20 years, apart from carve really elaborate pumpkins with the kids and make really, involved Easter eggs, but like, apart from that, this was not like a dream that I've been working towards, the entire time. But after losing dad, which again, if I had my choice, I would prefer to still have dad here, right? But I think it's not what happens to us. It's not what happens in our lives. It's how we choose to process those things and what we choose to do with those things that has, tremendous power. And so once I identified that, I wasn't fulfilling my ask, I wasn't doing what I was put here to do, that then opened the door to say, well, what if I was able to, exit the business in a way that made sense and kind of see what happens next.
How old are you when, and well, where were you in your business journey? And by the way, do you just want to tell us a quick deal, a little plug for your entrepreneurial path, because you built quite an empire. But I guess the question was, how old were you when you had this epiphany? Unfortunately prompted by, your dad dying early.
Yeah. So I would have been 39, I suppose, or 40, one of the two. And then it took another, let me think about this. About it. Well, let's see. Yeah, it took about 2 years, from that time. Like, it's not like I just, dropped everything, the next day, but the wheels started turning of like, I wonder, And so, I mean, my to say that I pursued entrepreneurship, from a young age, like that was an intentional choice, is an exaggeration. I fell into it. I was super fortunate to have been exposed to, that opportunity with Southwestern. Realized I had a knack, like a natural ability, in sales, and frankly, that's really the only thing that I had a natural ability in. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's something I try to remind people of all the time, when I do a little consulting on the side and personal coaching for people in business, is like, look, you really only need to be really good at like one or two things. Let's say that whatever you're trying to do requires whatever. If we're going to simplify it, there's 10 categories that you got to, figure out. You really only need to be elite or even above average in like one or two of them. And the rest of them, you just kind of figure out. You look around at people who are doing it successfully, you copy, you ask for mentorship, you ask for help, and you just kind of figured, and that's what I did. You know what I mean? I figured out how to, from as an individual producer, then how to, really be a good trainer, and then become a good leader that could not just train people to sell, but also develop them as human beings and help them progress, their career. And then ultimately became, my own agency. It was never an empire. I mean, it was a nice little brokerage, that we had 43 agents when I sold it. And so yeah, I mean, it's funny now, like, that was my identity at the time. That's how I sort of like got my achievement kicks, during that time. And since then, I've just sort of, again, recalibrated and refocused on this crazy art game, that I'm doing now.
Which is so cool, because I know a lot of folks listening. Just to be an entrepreneur is like, that's the tag. They're like, that's my metric. I just want to be an entrepreneur. I know that was for me is, I just want to be one. I want to go back to my 20-year reunion and say I'm an entrepreneur. And then that was it. That was my plan. And a lot of people. So the fact that you achieve that for a lot of people, and obviously, we can unpack that for days. We probably won't do it here, but what it takes to be one and why you should or shouldn't pursue that or
Yeah.
whatever. But I do have a question because you said something interesting.
Let me speak to that though, Mick, because I think there's an interesting thread there. I think that a big part of, finding fulfillment in life, and I try to use that word fulfillment more so than success. But we could replace success with our personal definition of what success looks like, because it's easy to fall into the trappings of the broad or sort of general sense of what success is, which I would argue for most people is probably not consistent with their own, right? But
yes,
you know what I mean? So I think it's important just to acknowledge, like, all right, what am I trying to do here? What's the ultimate goal, and what's the best vehicle for me to get from here to there? I am a big proponent of awareness. If I had to pick one, characteristic that I am actively pursuing, to cultivate in myself, and if I could just hand somebody something magically and say, hey, you now have this characteristic, it's the ability to really be intentional about, sort of observing ourselves from a third person. What's the author's name? You'd recognize it too, because he wrote a seminal business book, and I don't really think about those anymore unless they come to mind. Collins is his last name. He wrote Good to Great.
Jim Collins from Good to Great. Yeah,
that's exactly right. Yes. So he said something on the Tim Ferriss podcast once, which are great episodes. They're probably, I don't even know, probably 6 or 7 years old now, but he was on a couple of times and just shared gem after gem. But he once shared how he thinks about himself, and he really put this idea put a fine point to it. So he said, observe yourself the way that a scientist observes a subject, right? So let's just keep it real simple. Let's just keep it in the middle school science project realm. If we're doing a project that involves an ant farm, okay, and we're observing how ants respond to whatever, dark or light or whatever the variable that we might be trying to control for, we don't try to change their behavior. We observe it, we note it, and then we decide what to do with that information. So when we can cultivate this practice for ourselves and really taking that third party perspective of what has Bug Nathan got going on here, it's a really valuable practice from an emotional standpoint. Like, I'm very emotionally stunted, I would say. I've learned this, and it's been something that's been really helpful for me, specifically just in my marriage. Like, I have this, and part of it's just that achievement wiring. Like, if an emotion is not productive, I'm going to dismiss it. I'm going to push it aside from I have historically been inclined to push it aside for myself. And I certainly, if you're feeling things that aren't productive or useful to the mission of the moment, all right, let's go ahead and set those aside, right? Positive, 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 which has its place. So knowing that about myself, right? It's allowed me to become much more aware of, in situations where I'm feeling things that aren't necessarily useful, quote unquote, or productive. Hey, what is Bug Nathan experiencing here? If I just zoomed out and observed myself, what's really going on here? Because armed with that information, I can then make intentional choices about, is it time do I need to sit with it? Is it time to, meditate, to journal, to pray, to reach out to somebody? Do I need to go, sweat? What's and I have, sort of the recourse or the prescription that's gonna cure and assist in most situations. But it's taking that perspective of, to that Jim Collins point of, like, what is Bug Nathan? What's going on here? What is Bug Mikolai? Right? If you're just observing yourself, what's really going on here? Studying ourselves and cultivating awareness about, what's really going on here? And a lot of it is, I think it's, and this has been written about, a lot, over time. This is a very, Jungian, sort of approach to things, but like, we acquire, the first half of our lives is spent acquiring information, right?
Yeah.
And the second half of our lives is spent deciding what to let go of and what to set aside. We are all a product of our programming, which we can't control, early in life. We are just influenced by our programming, our everything, right? Our parents, our school experience, the people around us. But at a certain point, we, especially now as full grown adults, or at least, for you and I, the age that full grown adults are mentally, emotionally, somewhere between 12 and 16 years old, but still the age of an adult that ought to have acquired some maturity at this point. We now have the ability to first of all, again, become aware of like, what's influencing me here? What voices are in the room? That's something I think about in the studio a lot, right? Is like, okay, so if I'm stuck in this place of like, is this piece going to be well received? Is this going to get good critical, reception? Is someone going to want to buy this, right? Like those voices, as soon as I become aware and realize that Bug Nathan is being influenced by other voices in the room, I need to become aware of that and gently show them the door and excuse them, right? That's programming. Those are influences that don't have any place in the creative process. There's a time and a place for that to all get sorted out, but when I'm in the process of making isn't one of them. I'm just using that as an example of awareness and the power that comes from studying ourselves and becoming aware of what we are being influenced by and how it's influencing us. Yeah.
That is amazing. Well, I have so many questions in regards to some of the things you said there. Number one being in your own head when you're making art, because we can be in our own heads as we're taking a test in high school. We can be in our own heads as we're about to walk in and pitch a group of
Sure.
investors, whatever. How do you take that voice and turn into because you're alone making art. So this is the best, probably almost business or ADHD example we could put, is that you're in that studio by yourself making art. And
Yep.
if that were me, my head would be like, this is good, this is bad, this is bad. You shouldn't be, like just constantly fighting, let's say self-doubt. Making art isn't something that I know anyone other than you that does at a professional level. How do you coach the coach in your head to make art for art's sake and not for the desired outcome of making money? Or because I know that's not your drive. I mean, everyone wants to make money, but how do you I'm trying to ask a question in a way that doesn't suck, but I'm not doing a good job. The point is controlling that internal coach and making positive art for art's sake.
Yeah, I think I think a lot of it comes from this. Actually, it dovetails well from what I shared before in terms of it comes from initially being aware for me of what are the conditions that lead to a good result. If I'm thinking about really cultivating a good process, the results take care of themselves. If I'm thinking about the result, it's really easy to get stuck in all of the traps and many others that you didn't even identify, right? And so what I think about is, especially because my process is so explorational and experimental, I want to be surprised. I want to, I do a lot of building up of different layers of materials and then burning or carving or sanding or ripping away to reveal what's underneath. I love being surprised. In most cases, I built those layers up. I put those things there. I kind of know, what the next layer will show. But what I don't know is when all of these different materials, I did a piece for my show that's up in Munich right now. The feature piece is a large scale triptych. It's about, what is it? About 7 by 12 feet overall. And so this piece contains used coffee filters, feed bags from a farm, some billboard tarp. It's one of my favorite materials is the tarp that they make billboards out of. Some packing plastic. I used some ventilation steel, some galvanized steel that got ripped out of a building that I found in a dumpster. And so putting these different ingredients together and then exposing them to kind of see what's underneath. So with that, I mean, the resulting piece is something that is completely different than anything that I had imagined. And I love chasing, back to that chasing idea, I love chasing the feeling, the experience of like, oh, wow, look what happens when those layers interact with one another. Look what happens when I reveal, what's underneath. So to your original question, I am creating the conditions. First of all, becoming aware of like what process creates the result that I'm excited about,
Yeah.
that I feel good about sharing. But I think a lot about prioritizing the practice over the result, meaning that the piece that I'm working on is, it's not to make a successful, whatever the hell that means, quote unquote, piece of work. It's for me to advance my understanding of the material, and it's to advance my understanding of my process. And when my head is in that place, it takes all the pressure off from, is this piece going to work or not? I mean, 95+% of the things that I try don't work. I have piles and piles and piles, of things that just don't work. So it's accepting that, you only need to have, for me, the margin for error is huge, because I no longer identify with the result of this piece in front of me being a reflection of how good I am as an artist. And I struggle with that in a big way early on. Boy, everything that I did, based on how I felt about it and how people responded to it, that was the ultimate, judge, jury, and executioner, of how I felt, and how my self-esteem and my identity as, an artist was defined. And I don't do that anymore. Now it's all about, all right, how can I continue to experiment and explore and get closer to making my best work.
That is brilliantly said, man. The whole the goal is the destination, or the goal is the journey, not the destination,
Yeah.
kind of thing, and enjoying that process and relishing in the process. I mean, we do that with our consulting clients too, but we want to get acquired, we want to do these objectives, but let's enjoy the process. Let's enjoy what we're going to learn along the way.
And it's embracing uncertainty. I think that, this doesn't carry all the way through with, there are certainly some objectives in business where we kind of want to be able to predict, the outcome and track our measurables along the way. Right. But, for me in the studio here, it's about embracing uncertainty, and really it's about making peace with the fact that I really don't know. That I really don't know what I'm doing. I mean, I'm only certain in life of like a handful of things. I could count them on one hand, the things that I'm absolutely sure of, right? Everything else is like, I don't know. I mean, in some cases, I have an opinion. I know what I think, but it's being okay with uncertainty. For me, what I'm working towards is just being at peace with like, I don't know. I mean, I make my best work when I start from a place of just that whole beginner's mind. I've said, but I did an artist talk at the show recently, that we posted as on our last episode of the Just Make Art podcast. There we go. Branding, marketing, ding.
Get it.
But I talked about like, I don't have any interest in mastery, even the whole idea of being a professional. I'm like, I'd rather be a pro-am. I'd rather be a professional amateur. I'd rather be professional at pursuing a bunch of different things, being an amateur at a whole bunch of things. And then that combination of things, when put together, creates something that is, completely unique, right? So back to your example before of the Rolling Stones, if they had just specialized in mastering one genre, they might have been known. We might know of like a song or two, but they wouldn't have been anything close to what they became by combining a bunch of different things in their own way,
Yeah. Oh man, action's the best teacher. That's
That's it.
action's the best teacher. And we have a philosophy in our house where we either win or learn. With my daughter's candle business, I Those Little Lights, it's we didn't know about wood wicks before. We didn't know that you had to use soy, like all these different things. But
Right.
for people saying, we've heard of the Rolling Stones because here's what they did. They did.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Was their first few songs they wrote as a band good? We'll probably never hear them. Your first piece, was it hanging up in Munich? No, right? But you did it. But you took action and you learned from it.
That's right.
Speaking of that learning, I'm just curious because you said you're going to go to Chicago and you're going to sit and you're going to look at a piece for 30 minutes. I have a two-pronged question because I'm just curious. What are you looking at? What are you looking for? And then what are you hoping when you do your shows that people see in your art?
That's interesting. Yeah, I think it's the same. It's funny. Corey came to the studio. Did a studio visit the other day. One of our mutual friends, and he said something that I hear a lot from people, and it's a version of, I don't really understand art, but ... I like looking at whatever it is.
Yeah.
And there's certainly plenty of, academic filters through which one can filter the experience of looking at art, for sure, right? But let's talk about music, right? I love music. I love listening to it. I've got a lot of artists that I, geek out on and, whatever, but I don't understand how to make music. I don't understand it the way that you do when you listen to it, right? Not even close. But do I feel qualified to say what I like and what I don't like? For sure, because it's my opinion, right? And so art is the exact same way, right? Like, you don't need to understand art to know whether or not something affects you or whether or not something moves you, whether or not you enjoy the experience of looking at it. And just does it affect you in some way? You don't need to like it, So for me, all of my work is an invitation to explore. I think for me, a successful piece and how I hope it's perceived is that it invites people to come a little closer, right? Really, really take a look, really investigate, what's here, maybe even do a little, detective work and try to guess, which ingredient or material on the material list, how that's occurring, when it looks, because it looks very different. Part of my sort of goal and something I have fun with is fundamentally transforming the look of something so it's not immediately obvious, what it was before. That process of transformation is really, really important to me personally and artistically. And so for me, yeah, it's everything that I do is an invitation to look a little closer, right? What is here? What was here before? And what's worth carrying forward? And if I'm successful, hopefully really inspiring some of those questions to be also directed inward, as well.
Well, first of all, I did not know, and I can't wait to go and look again at your work, because I didn't know the story behind why you used trash, we'll say. I always thought your art was trashy. I didn't know that it was literally trash. Just kidding. It's beautiful. If anyone is listening, check out his work. It's fantastic. But I didn't know that there was actually a story of why you did that. I've always wanted to know why, because I remember the transition of you painting and then now the pieces that you've created, and now you've taken off since you kind of picked that lane. And I love your description of art. Rick Rubin made an entire career out of not playing an instrument, just his musical tastes, and we can all say he's done okay. And
have you read The Creative Act, the book they wrote a couple years ago?
I haven't, but I will. I will
You
now.
need to.
But
It's extraordinary. It's one of the first books I recommend to anybody who's interested in the creative process of any kind. It's broadly applicable to, any kind of creativity, truly. So, yeah, I'd highly recommend that.
Creating art, whatever it be, a business. I mean, that's the thing that I've been so fascinated to pick your brain on what do you look for when you see a piece? What do you see? Is it to emulate, right? Like music. If I love the Black Crowes, so I can play 100 Jimmy Buffett or Black Crowes songs because that's music I really dug when I was growing up.
Yeah.
But I don't listen to it to copy it. I listen to it because I like it. And then the music that I do create probably sounds a little, it sounds like that because that's the kind of the art that I want to make to sound like, because that's what I would listen to.
Right.
And it sounds like that's what you create, but I did not know the story behind the trash. Sorry.
That's a really interesting thing too. So just on the music thread, it's funny when you listen to your favorite musical artists and bands talk about who they were most influenced by.
Yeah.
It's very often not what you would guess, right? Like where you would put them in sort of the lineage of that particular genre, wherever they may fit in. It's almost never, I shouldn't say, I mean, it is sometimes like, oh yeah, okay, so I'm not going to use a specific example here, but sure. So we're a punk band. We were influenced by other, whatever punk bands, but it's so fascinating to hear, the tremendous range of influences that you would never guess in their sound. And that to me makes a lot of sense, because it's not so much, so to your question, it's not so much how can I make something that looks like this. It's more, how can I identify what about the essence of this moves me, and how can I apply that to what I do, right? I mean, the best musicians listen to a lot of music and have been influenced by a tremendous amount of music, right? The best artists, in my opinion, look at and have seen a lot of art and continue to, because it does a couple things. It does what I described before as far as, inspiring, but it also, for me, so my goal is to get as close as possible to making work that is uniquely mine, right? Setting aside for a moment the arguable fact that everything under the sun has already been done, and everything that's going to be made going forward is just going to be a slightly different version of things that are already been made. But to get as close as possible to making something that is unique to me alone, I'm also looking for, all right, when I see something, to, if it moves me, be moved by it, but to also delete that thing from my vocabulary as something that I'm going to use specifically, right?
Yeah.
So I've got very, ambitious goals, to have my art hang in museums someday. This happens for 0.0000 infinity 1%, of artists, actually have work that gets, institutionalized into the canon, right? So it's a very aggressive goal, and statistically, unlikely, right? But that's what I'm shooting for, right? And so what I think about a lot is, the only way to do that is not to make my version of something that's already hanging on those walls.
Mm-hmm.
It's to make something that is introducing a new piece of vocabulary into the overall conversation.
That is fantastic. I don't know if you heard the Nirvana story, but very few people know that David Grohl was a huge disco fan. So the like it smells
sure.
like Teen Spirit is
Yeah.
actually a disco beat. And then obviously Kurt Cobain isn't singing disco anytime, that doesn't have the voice, but it
Right.
translated for your art. Is it like that? Like, okay, you hear a disco beat. I'm just gonna use music because that's my world, and your art. You hear a disco beat, but your band is a grunge band. Is your art that way too? Like, do you see art through Nathan's artistic goggles? And then what, like a painting, maybe it's a disco beat, it's a painting, or it's a physical carving, or a statue or something. And then you go into the dumpster. Are you trying to take bits of that art? Because art is art, but your art is completely different than anything I've ever seen. I've never seen art like yours before.
Well, I'm most inspired. I mean, I get most of my like direct visual influences from things that wouldn't be considered art at all. I'm most inspired by things in the world that are in the natural world, or man-made things that are degrading and falling apart.
Yeah.
The most beautiful line work that I've ever seen in my life
Sorry,
is
what is line work?
just lines, I'm drawing a line, right?
Right
The
on.
most interesting marks are, to me, cracks in the pavement, and the way that they've been patched up over time, and the way that the different, tar patches, for example, asphalt patches, for example, fade at a different rate and have a slightly different tone or slightly different color than the original asphalt or the repair that was made, whatever, 4 years previous. When I walk by, a brick wall where the brick is fallen apart. When I see things like, the way that mold grows, or things that would otherwise be considered, ugly or gross, there's tremendous inspiration and beauty in that for me. And so, I mean, this really goes back to, I didn't invent this sort of aesthetic. This comes from a Japanese aesthetic philosophy called wabi-sabi, which really highlights the beauty in the small, delicate, sometimes unnoticed things. And so a lot of what I'm doing and a lot of what I'm inspired by, really wouldn't be considered art at all. I am trying to mimic in my own way the effect that time has on material. the way that I accelerate that is with, friction and cutting and burning and heat and sort of just, accelerating what time would normally do to material on its own.
Yeah, it's so unique, man. I'm just like now I'm just geeking out as a fan because I just like to get into an artist's mind. This
It's fun to
is a
talk about.
huge treat. Um, okay, I want to talk about challenges, but because you just put out a BHAG, big hairy audacious goal is to be featured in museums.
Yeah.
What does the next 3 to 5 years look like as far as goal setting? And then what are the obstacles right now that you're facing on a daily basis that maybe are keeping you from achieving that?
Yeah, I think it's the art world, more so than any ladder that I've attempted to climb, before that I'm aware of. There's no rule book, there's no map. I mean, it is the wild, wild west of just like, it's so crazy. But I was talking to a friend of mine, and this is where, so before I tell the story of Andrew, I want you to bring me back to connecting the thread of entrepreneurialism, the entrepreneurial path, and the
I think you're
artistic
thinking
path.
imperialism, but no, I'm just kidding.
Let's not go with that. Yeah. So bring me back to that if I forget. But I was talking to, do you know Andrew Hubbleson? Did you
No, I
know
do
Andrew?
not.
So he was in Southwestern as well, I think, for a couple of summers. Awesome guy. He is he's our age, but he lives out in New York, lives with his family of 5, and is supporting them as a working actor on Broadway and doing some things in film as well.
Cool.
He's got a super cool project coming up. He's got a major role in the Broadway production of Stranger Things. That's going to be running on Broadway.
I didn't. Okay, wow, that's awesome.
It's super interesting. So I was talking to him the other day, and we were just kind of connecting and catching up. And he's like, "Man, I'm so jealous of you because you just get to make whatever you want whenever you want to make it, and you're really not beholden to any external influences to make what you want to make." Mm-hmm. And I was like, I really appreciate you giving me perspective on that, because it really helped for me understand the connections between being an entrepreneur and being a creative.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of my, I did go through this sort of checklist in my mind of like, all right, once I left the business world, what things are important to me. And one of the top things on the list, maybe number one, was how can I reduce or eliminate altogether the amount of external permissions needed to do what I want to do. Right.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which is exactly why, because I am certainly, wired for entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. But really back to the ADD thing, that's a product of like, I don't like being told what to do. I love asking, right, what to do. I love seeking out information and seeking out advice, but I'm really not good at being told, what to do. I don't think I would have been a very good, employee, right? And so from an artistic standpoint, it's really about, making work that is most authentic to me. And again, back to that whole like sitting with uncertainty and trusting the process, trusting that, if my goal is to make work that is as unique as possible, I need to accept that it's probably not going to sell as well as in the short term, as well as work that looks like other stuff, right? Because if one is making another version of things that look like other things, there's already sort of a recognition, a visual vocabulary for that, and by extension, a market for it, right? And so, to your question of kind of what's next, for me, it's action always wins, right? How can I make more work that is unique to my voice? I think this is one that Rick Rubin talks about a lot in that book is you make the work that you want to see. You make the things that you want. Like I'm making work that if it never sells, I'd be okay with having it around me. You know what I mean? Like I am making the work that I'm most interested in seeing. I'm making what I want to exist in the world. And what comes of it from there is really, out of my hands. Now, I will say there are a lot of things that fall outside of the space of actually making the work that are also important, So this is where a lot of my experience in business has certainly served me well in terms of understanding some things about, branding and marketing and all the sort of, bullshit that is outside of what I'd prefer to be doing, which is just making art all day, but
Yeah,
still very helpful in getting more eyeballs, on what I'm doing.
that's awesome. Well, and we were talking about, this is why I just hearing an artist's story is so appealing to me, because when we look at businesses, we look at P&L, we look at 3 years of tax
Hmm.
returns,
Yeah.
it's very AB, right?
Yeah.
But with art and your goal to be featured in museums someday, is that more, what's more important to create art that is your voice, or to create art that is hung in a museum? And what is the path to achieving that goal your way?
Well, to me, it's the same. It's the same thing, right? It's the
Cool.
exact same message or essence of what I was sharing with you about the podcast before, right? Of like,
Yeah.
so when Ty and I started, doing our podcasting thing a couple of years ago, we had a couple of non-negotiables as well, and one of them, the biggest one, was like, let's do something that we're going to be excited to do, no matter how it's received, no matter how many people listen to it, no matter, if we ever get any ad revenue or any other stuff, like, let's do something that we're going to be excited about making indefinitely. And wouldn't you know it, when you do that, it's going to resonate. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, maybe not for 5, 10 years, but it's been so cool. I mean, and you offline, you shared with me some of the examples of people that already have been giving you amazing feedback about how they benefited, from what you're doing here. That's the deal. You know what I mean? So for me, the end is not something I think about. I think about the means and the process and the journey, more than anything else, because one hand washes the other. The closer I get to making work that is most authentic to me, the better my chances, the better my already very long chances of achieving that sort of big picture goal, are. And so I really don't think about that. Again, when I'm in the studio, I'm not thinking like, this is going to be the one that's going to get, acquired by MoMA or whatever, but I do think about it again, just from a volume standpoint of like, I love the idea that every single thing that I do is like, this might be something that is the one. This could be the one, and that's just fun because I don't know, and I won't know even when I get done making it. In most cases, for quite some time, what's going to happen to it.
Well, sure, because I mean, I could be wrong, but a museum, for a piece to be hung in a museum, the museum decides, right? Like, you don't say, "Hey, this should be hanging there." Like, they have to see something that really speaks to them to say,
Yeah,
"We want this here," right? So will that be kind of a fun surprise when it happens? Is like, "Oh,
there's a lot of
I thought you guys
variables
would dig
that
this one, but
yeah.
huh?"
There's a lot of variables that go into it, some of which I'm aware of, and probably many of which that I'm not. But that is actually the point at which you're very beholden to external factors for sure. So yeah, it's
But what
an
I love is
uncontrollable.
you've shared your goal, like your vision, your dream, but you're doing it without sacrificing. And it's interesting when people, like you said, or this show even, Coffee and Closers are very successful, but and we get a lot of good feedback from it. But we've got the most sincere feedback from this, and there's no angle here. I just wanted to put this out in the world,
Yeah,
and hopefully it would inspire people, because I wished it would have existed when I was younger. And it's really neat. And I guess for listeners, taking away is to listen to your story, to say, our non-negotiable is we're going to put authentic art that comes from our heart, and if
yeah.
you buy it, or if you like it, or if it hangs somewhere, and if it speaks to you, that is a byproduct of being authentic and not wavering. That is a compelling mission, man.
Well, I mean, the last thing you ever want to do is be influenced by commercial variables as a creative, right? I mean, the history of music is littered with bands that made really great, debut albums, maybe a solid sophomore effort, but at a certain point, the label, told them, here's what's hot right now. Can you please do your version of this? And that was that, right? So, yeah, the last thing I ever want to do is be influenced by those external voices. Yeah.
How does someone listen to this that wants to do art, whatever it may be, how did they how do they afford the luxury to create art that is true to them without the label, if you will, or the right, like the need to produce and income and so on? Because I think everyone, if they could, would follow their heart. And some people are listening going, well, that must be nice for you. But like, what would you say to that person?
Yeah, I think the biggest, and we talk about this a lot on the podcast because a lot of our listeners are full-time artists. A lot of them are just people
Hmm.
who are interested in art, but a lot of them are people who are just doing it part-time as they're able. And that's my biggest piece of advice is like just start now. The barrier again, like to my previous example of my friend Andrew, like the barrier to entry to make art is almost zero. If you locked me in your garage, for a week,
Which I did 4 years ago.
yeah, I mean, it's you can make things out of anything, and so I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make, I think in general, in life is like just sort of waiting for all of the conditions to be perfect to start the thing. Right.
Hmm.
So what I'm saying applies to, people that want to make art. It applies to people who want to start a business. It applies to, fill in the blank. Start now, start small, but start now. Like there's always a scaled down version, almost always, a scalable version that you can start now to increase your knowledge, your experience, your awareness of what you might, want to make. So whether it's, downloading an app onto your iPad or your phone and starting to doodle, but it's replacing, oh, I don't have time. And that's fair. The luxury that I have, my previous life was the patron for my current existence in a big way. That's a luxury that most people don't have, and I'm very aware of that. However, we all have more time than we think if we're willing to, again, study Bug Nathan and realize, all right, how much is this asshole how much time is this person spending on social media? How much are they investing in, watching TV or following a sports team or doing all of the things that we do that just sucks time. We all do it,
Yeah.
So if someone's like, I don't have any time, it's like, all right, well, do a full audit of your week. I mean, really like 15-minute blocks from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. And I can find you an hour or two for sure of time that you are absolutely wasting. Or if you really want what you profess to want, you'd be willing to, replace or recalibrate your priorities in certain areas. A lot of things that are, by far non-essential, Did you
That
read
is
that book?
fantastic.
That's a great business book too, for the business audience. Essentialism, that Greg McCown book.
Well, you're the
Amazing.
one that introduced,
Am I?
like,
Okay.
game changer. Like
Yeah.
a book that I read every year to remind myself of what you just said.
Yeah.
When we started to do this podcast, I thought, "Oh, I'd love to get back into the podcast game, but I don't have time." And that was during the Viking season. And that is 4 hours times what, 16, 17 games. That's,
Right.
you could do a lot of damage with that much time if
And
you just
listen,
repurpose.
if you're a Vikings fan, they're just doing damage to your heart anyway. So you're actually saving yourself. I say that as a much less intense Vikings fan than I used to be for that very reason, but that's still my team for sure. Yeah.
What does your family think of your art? Like, are your daughters inspired that you chose this path? What does Nikki think of your art? Like, do they like it?
Yeah. Yeah. They actually do. I mean, I think it's been really cool. I mean, because obviously, we it was a big change. I mean, I'm eternally grateful to Nikki, especially for like being okay with me making the switch, because certainly the smart thing to do, from a financial standpoint, would have been to stay on the path and keep growing the business. Like, so I need to give her those props for being as supportive as she's been and continues to be, because without that, like none of this would be right. But yeah, they like it, and I think from an example standpoint, for my girls, like it's cool that like their dad being an artist is like kind of a flex for them in a funny way, like
It's a
she's like,
flex for me. I get to tell someone, like, I got a buddy who's a three-time world champion in jiu-jitsu. I got a buddy who's a famous artist, and it makes me feel cool. So I imagine that they feel that that's awesome as well.
Again, not actually famous, but thank you. Um,
Famous to me.
no, so it's it's super cool. So I mean, I think just the example of and honestly too, like still applying the same. I mean, I think as parents, like the best thing that we can do is model the characteristics and the behavior that we would hope, for our kids, right? So the whole like do what I say, not what I do, that we all
Yes.
fall prey to as parents is one thing, but like my hope is that I am showing them what it takes to really pursue a crazy goal of that degree. And also, I mean, they're seeing the sacrifices too, right? Like people have this idea that artists, non-artists have this idea that artists are just skipping through the daisies and just loving every moment and just all, zenned out like Bob Ross, and finishing a painting in a, 26-minute, segment for the next episode. Like that's not it, man. It is real. It's hard. It's damn hard, and as I was preparing for this last solo exhibition in Munich, it was about 2.5 months. Yeah, roughly 10 weeks of 60 to 80 hour weeks. I was here in the studio making art. I was spending time with the family, sneaking a workout in here or there, and that's it. Like that's like, so them just seeing like what it is to be all in and really, go all out, in the pursuit of something, that's sort of off the beaten path, I think is what I'm hoping they're taking from it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we were talking about this offline, Woods. For those listening, saying, "Well, I want to do that, but I couldn't find the time," which we've covered. I couldn't do that because I couldn't afford to. I could never make money podcasting. Well, Howard Stern, love him or hate him, makes $126 million a year. So clearly, there's money. Not that everyone's going to make that, but there is a. It breaks the threshold of the bar with someone like yourself that is supporting a college student, like supporting a family, or your buddy in New York that's supporting a family of 5 that is making a living. Now, are they loaded? Are they rich? Are they rich in happiness? Are they rich in joy? Are they rich in fulfillment? Choose your heart. Choose your what success is to you.
Yeah, I
Is
mean,
that what?
you back to my previous point, but like if you're going to try to do something in this sort of creative space, especially a space that's as crowded as podcasting is now, right? Like
Mhm.
Howard Stern or the Joe Rogans or whatever, like like they absolutely benefited from being in that earliest, first wave where there was nothing but, whatever, blue ocean, right? That's not the case anymore, And so yeah, I mean, you have to do it because you love it and because you get fulfillment from it, and be willing to, do whatever, job or career is necessary to be able to, sort of pay the bills. It's like the leap between how do I support myself with my art and whatever a person's doing right now. It always starts with like, you have to make art regularly. You have to get into the practice of doing the thing, for you. You have to, and you have to do what you're doing right now, which is just making a lot of podcasts, getting better at it, right? Like building an audience, figuring out what works and what doesn't, and just accepting that it's going to be a long road that may never pay off financially. Therefore, the motivation being more intrinsic has to be something that burns, within you. And there's nothing wrong at all with being a hobbyist. I think that if you've got that sort of creative bug in you, you will be happier. You will be more fulfilled, personally, if you find an outlet, for that. I mean, there's a reason why the Michaels and the Hobby Lobbies and places like that are doing great. And it's not because, your blue chip artists are buying their supplies there, because they're not, right? It's because people are just doing things because the fulfillment of just like, I made this.
Yeah.
Like there's something so like, our kids when they're young, the pride, the absolute joy they have when they get to come and say, Dad, I made this, right? Like that child is still alive and well within each of us. We just have to be okay with making things that don't look good. We have to be okay with like sort of having that childlike approach of like, I'm going to make this just because I feel like making it and just because it's fun. and I don't
Yeah.
have to share it with anybody. I don't have to, you know what I mean, post it or whatever. Like just the fulfillment and the pure joy that comes from making something. And that could be anything, right? Like you and I have a lot of friends, who get a lot of joy from, you know, building a deck or doing home improvements or turning wrenches on a car, or it doesn't matter what the outlet is. But again, back to my earlier idea or point about kids having, you know, multiple outlets for things. I think it's really healthy to have those types of hobbies and interests that give us fulfillment and something to really put ourselves into, especially when someone's engaged in a profession that maybe doesn't provide that for them, which is, let's be honest, is the, you know, a lot of people, you know?
Absolutely, man. Well, I mean, you talk about, podcasts and artists and flooded markets, I mean, people still popping up burger joints, right? I mean, burgers been
Yeah,
around forever. My daughter has
sure.
a candle business. There's weeks she makes more money than I do slinging candles. And you want to talk about a commoditized business. But she loves making them.
Yeah.
I love everything you said about focus on the passion, create the art that you're proud of. And if someone buys it, that's a byproduct. That's rich, man. That's super rich. So that our listeners want to continue this conversation for the next one, because I'm definitely having you back. This is just absolutely shredded my heart and just it's brought me so much joy. I've learned so much. I have one more question before we part, and this is a question I always ask at the end: is there is a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, an 18-year-old, maybe a 44-year-old listen to this podcast right now, and I know that you coach, so people go, everyone go follow Nathan, and I'll post some of the stuff in the final product, where to find his art, where to find his coaching, which is nathanterborg.com. And what is the best advice that either you've received or would provide for somebody who right now is just discovering that they're not alone, but they have ADHD? They're not alone. I want you guys to know that right now. You are not alone. I felt very alone. You are not alone now. We're going to continue this podcast as long as you guys keep listening, so that you know that that is true. And you're going to get to meet people like Nathan who have, accomplished great feats despite having ADHD. But what would you tell them right now to believe in, to pursue? What can you tell them if they're listening right now?
I would say that, especially for somebody who's, you know, in the thick of the challenges that go along with that, I would say that it absolutely gets better when you're in the game of figuring it out, when you're proactively looking for ways to progress and grow. You have to exhaust your resources, the ones that are already available to you.
Mm-hmm.
And if those don't work, you have to go out and find new ones. You know, the only the only the only reason people stay stuck is because they are choosing to stay stuck. And what I mean by that is, of course, nobody would ever say, hey, option A, stay stuck. Option B, get unstuck. Of course, that's a passive choice, right? The staying stuck choice is a product of passively just accepting, oh, this is just the way it's going to be. And I guess I'm just here to say, like, no, that's not the case unless you let it be the case, right? So we have to be proactively in the game of figuring out what's going to work for us and starting with what has worked for others, asking for help, and making the most of every available resource out there, of which there are many. You know, some of which you're probably already familiar with, many of which you're not. So keep looking, keep digging, keep reaching out, keep asking until you find what's going to work for you.
When you met Doug and Julie and you were interested in art, did you believe that you'd be on this show talking about your work featured in Munich? Did you believe that in your heart, that someday I will manifest this to be true?
No, it wasn't even I mean, when I was that age, I was just, you know, dreaming about whatever, being a professional athlete or some, you know, other highly unlikely, unrealistic goal, you know? No. And I think that's kind of what's fun about it too, is like, you know, I'm living a dream I didn't even know I had.
Yes.
Right. So I think, you know, the other piece that I would add before we close, I got about 5 minutes before I gotta hop off here, but, would be that, you never know how what you're doing now is going to prepare you for what's coming next. I had no idea that when I was building a business and going through all of the challenges and the grind of, is this going to work? And what do we got to do to make it work? I had no idea that the things that I was learning at that time were going to apply to me living my dream later on. I had no clue, right? So a lot of it just comes from that place of trusting, like, all right, you may not be, where you'd like to be right now, but if you are, again, just engaged in the game of growth, the things that you learn along the way will absolutely serve you when you do get the opportunities to do what you might really love and not just, like enough to do it for a period of time.
Oh, the prizes in the journey, man. I have loved this conversation. Thank you so much for being on the show. I've dropped and sprinkled your handles and so on, but why don't you just give it to us? Where can we find you and support you? Because I have a hunch after listen to this, people are going to want to get to know you.
Yeah, so it's just my Instagram, probably the easiest way. Just Nathan Terborg, NATHANTERBORG, is my handle on Instagram, and I always reply to DM. So people want to hit me up or ask questions or reach out or connect that way. That's a great way to do it. And then my website for my art is just again just my full name, NathanTerborg.com, and there's a part in there where you can email me as well. So that would be that.
Awesome, brother. Well, thank you so much for being on. Guys, thanks for listening. I know we went deep or a little longer on this one, but hopefully it was worth it. It was worth it for me. And keep following, keep sharing with your friends if you found inspiration in this. And we'll see you guys in the next one.
Hold on.
Thanks again, Nathan.
Thank you for having me. And I'm really proud of you for doing this.
Hey.
I love what you're doing. So keep it up.
Right on, man. It means a ton coming from you. Right on. Thanks, brother.
You got it.
All right, guys. We'll see you in the next one. Cheers.
Thanks, buddy. Bye.